Hi, I'm Kevin Lopez with the Azure Stack Global Black Belt team, and I'm joined by Dwayne Hall here, one of my colleagues on the Azure Stack team. Dwayne, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Dwayne Hall, Global Black Belt for Azure Stack, based in the U.S. Northeast.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about, again, an additional thing to Azure Stack, SQL and MySQL resource providers. And Dwayne is kind enough to walk us through. So we have a lot of customers that do SQL today in Azure. And so Dwayne, you're going to show us a little bit about what we could do on Azure Stack.
Yeah, absolutely. SQL resource provider in Azure Stack is a little different than what we're doing in Azure. So we'll take a look at what it does and the key benefits that we get from it.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right, let's jump into it. Okay, so the SQL resource provider for Azure Stack gives us the ability to provide database as a service for our tenants. So the key benefits is there's a resource provider for SQL and there's one for MySQL. You get a common experience across the two environments. We're using common APIs. It gives you the ability to use any version of SQL or MySQL and attach to it.
Okay.
Essentially, what we're doing is allowing our administrators to set up a SQL server, use the resource provider to attach to it, and then deploy databases on top of that.
Okay, so in one of our previous sessions, we talked about like offerings and all those things that you did with us. So that would fit right into there then, that's what
Absolutely. You'll set up an offering,
Perfect.
You'll give them quotas, and they'll have the ability to self-provision SQL databases.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So the resource provider itself is a set of APIs that allow you to connect to a SQL server. The key benefits that we get from it are the ability to do create, delete, update, and retrieve database actions. Some of the considerations that we have to look at are the administrator needs to manage the underlying IaaS itself. So this is where one of the key differences between Azure Stack, resource provider, and Azure. In Azure, we manage the back-end SQL environment for you. With the Azure Stack SQL resource provider, you set up the hosting server. It can be hosted on Azure Stack itself, in an IaaS VM, or it could be external to the stack, so a cluster that you may already be running. You install the resource provider, you connect it to the host, and then it gives you the ability to provision databases on top of that.
Okay.
So again, it can include SQL or MySQL. They're separate resource providers, but they essentially give you the same functionality for both technologies.
And so these considerations, you're speaking specifically about the Azure Stack administrator, right? So whether that's if me as a customer has an Azure Stack or if I'm a service provider and I'm doing it, these are the things that I need to consider.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're a service provider, you'll set up the back end, and then you'll give your tenants access to those resources.
Beautiful.
Okay. So some key concepts to review here. The resource provider, you have three components. You have the provider itself, which is running on a VM. It gives you access to endpoints. You have the SQL and MySQL adapters, and then the hosting server itself. So you set up the hosting server first, you install the resource provider, and then basically configure your access. So let's go ahead and just look at what this looks like in the portal. Okay, so we're in the Azure Stack admin portal. This is the administrator portal. As we recall from previous sessions, there's two portals in Azure Stack. There's the administrator portal where you go in and do the back-end administration of Azure Stack, and then there's the tenant portal where you go in and consume the services.
And so I always like to point on that top left corner, right, is where you could see.
Yep, you can see this is the Azure Stack administrator. You can also tell because I keep mine black so I know where I am. And I'm logged in with an account that has full administration access. So for this component, we have the looking at SQL. So if I want to go into I've already installed the resource provider and set it up. We'll just go in and look at how this thing is configured.
Okay.
So I'm going to look at the SQL. It's identical for MySQL, but If I go into my SQL hosting servers, you can see I have a SQL hosting server. This is a SQL box that I've installed on a virtual machine inside of Azure Stack. Again, it could have been external to the stack, and I was just connecting to it. You can have you can manage multiple hosts in here with different tiers of service. So you could have your maybe a standard SQL server where a lot of your devs are just going in and hitting some databases, you know, creating and deleting, and there's a churn there. You may want to have a high performance SKU. You may want to have a high availability SKU. So there's reasons you can have multiple databases that you're managing from this resource provider. So for this one, I've got my SQL server stood up. We can go in and see I've provisioned 4 databases in here. I have roughly 100 gigabyte is what I allocated to this, and I'm only using close to what's at 3 gigabytes. So,
All right.
So essentially, this is, you know, we're not going to walk through the setup process today, but once you get this set up, this is all there is to it.
Okay.
Then what we do is we'll go into how do I make this available to my tenants. So, you know, again, like we looked at previously, we have offers. So in this environment, I've created a offer for MySQL, for SQL. Inside of here, my offer consists of a plan. If I look at my plan, you can see it's my SQL plan here, or SQL DB plan. And it consists of just the one resource. So if I go back and look at this offer and see who has access to it, we can see, look at my subscription. And we can see I have a subscription for this, and it's been allocated out. If I switch over to my tenant portal, in my tenant portal, let's just go to the main page. You'll notice that the tenant portal, there we go. The tenant portal looks very much like Azure,
right.
You know, same basic dashboard. I can customize and set this up for however I like. I can go and look at what subscriptions I have access to. In this case today, we know that we're working with SQL, so I'm going to go into the SQL provider here, and I've already previously provisioned 3 databases. So just to provision a database, very simple in here. I'll choose Add. Keep with my very complex naming convention. I'm going to call it DB, SQL DB 3, actually 4. Give it a max size, so in this case we'll keep it reasonably small since it's a demo. And I can choose to put it in an existing resource group, or I can create a new resource group. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create a SQL. I can type SQL DB4. It's going into my local Azure Stack, which is we've named West. And SKUs. So inside of here, you can set up multiple SKUs. Like I said, you can manage multiple instances of SQL databases, and you can also manage multiple SKUs. So in here, I've gone in and I've set up a standard SKU for this. I could have a premium SKU. I could have a high availability SKU. I'll need to create a login in order to connect to the database once it's out there. And I've previously created a SQL admin login. So I'll go ahead and use that and hit create. This takes all of about 15 seconds to go out and provision this database. So we can see that it's running up here and that deployment was successful. If I refresh my blade, we'll see that I now have a SQL 4 out there without the DB.
Very cool.
So much for my naming convention.
Yeah.
So it's that simple. You set up the host server, you install the resource provider, you set up your offers and plans to give your tenants access to the database, and then they can go out and self-provision and create databases.
This is good stuff. I mean, I know we get asked about it quite a bit. So thanks for sharing that today. Any closing remarks?
Go out and have some fun with Azure Stack.
All right. Thanks for joining us today. See you at the next one.
Thank you.